So this is the Gauntlet GMing Q&A. It's a Saturday morning. It's earlier for some people than others, but fair enough. There we are. And this is a video we are putting together to talk about if you'd like to run for the Gauntlet Hangouts, sort of what you need to know. Additionally, I think it's as important if you want to run online, generally, what you might need to know for recording things, for setting things up, what are best practices, all of that. So this covers both of those. So even if you don't want to run for the Gauntlet, you just want to run generally online, I'm hoping that will give some advice and some insight on that. And I have with me the person who knows more about this than I do, Rich Rogers, who has been doing this longer, who is a vet. And you may notice that he is in a new location. He has a starscape behind him, which is pretty amazing here. I have to pull that up on the camera there. It's awesome.
Thank you.
That is not a special effect. He's done practical effects. He's like the new Star Wars. So that is a physical thing behind him rather than a green screen. And with us, we have Jesse Ross, right? Okay. And we have Joshua Fox. And we have Tomer Grants. Am I saying that right? Wrong? Okay. All right. So one of the things I want to start with is if here's best practices. If you sign up for a Gauntlet Hangout game and you can't make it, drop yourself from the thing so people who are on the wait list can come on, because we were supposed to have a bunch more people, but they didn't show. So there you go. Those are best practices to start with. I'm going to begin with two of the practical issues for running. One is how you get a game set up if you want to run for the Gauntlet. What are the steps and stages there, the minimals and so on, and both mechanically and otherwise. And then I want to talk about how you set up your actual Hangouts game on YouTube. Now, for some of you, it may be a little bit redundant, may know all this, but I hope you'll bear with me. And if you have questions about the process as we're going along, please interrupt me on that. So let's say that you want to run for the Gauntlet Hangouts. What's the minimum? Well, one of the minimums is I ask that you've played with us for a bit, that you've played with some of the Gauntlet games. I think that's really important to see how we structure games, how we do safety tools, that kind of thing, but also get a sense of what the community is like. Rich and I have both played in other online game communities, and there can be a very different feel, very different expectations for how you play, what the intensity is, you know, how much distraction there are all those things. So I think it's really good to come in and play a little bit with us. And then if you dig it, hey, come and run for us. And if you want to do that and you've had a chance to think about what you want to run, you can contact myself, or you can contact Jason Cordova, and that you can do that through our G+ communities or through email. We'll have some links to that in the description notes of this, and talk with me, and then we'll get you essentially on the calendar. We have a Gauntlet website, Gauntlet Hangouts calendar, and this is essentially a sign-up system with RSVPs and a wait list and everything, and it has a great calendar to it. It's a solid thing. So what we would do is we would get you access to set up an event, and then you would go on to the Gauntlet Hangouts site. I'll put a link there for people who are watching this right now. And you can go there and create a new event. And it just says new event. There's a button there. It says new event. You'll set up a title. Title should be descriptive. Should say what the system is. If it's multiple parts, you should definitely say X of X parts, however many parts it is. You set the maximum number of users. That's not including yourself. So the GM plus 4 players, you would put 4 in there. The all access time would be a week out from the time you post it, because we do for our Patreon users at the 7+ level, we give them a week early access for supporting the community. And then you would put the event start date in there. Now, there's a calendar that you can shift and click on for all of that. And that one of the things to remember is that the starting time is down at the bottom, because I often will set the date and then forget to set the time, and it looks like I'm doing it at like 10 in the morning when I'm not. You'll put a description in the box of what the game's about. It's recommended that this be fairly tight. Talk about tone, talk about what the system is, do your pitch in 1 or 2 paragraphs. I go overboard on that, and sometimes it looks really awful. So I suggest having that pretty tight. And then you can choose an event picture, and that's like a JPEG. You click on choose file, and you can upload that from your computer. It will make whatever picture you have a square. So I recommend you do that ahead of time. Convert it into a square, crop it into that, and then put it in there, because otherwise it will go, okay, let's resize this. Not very well. So go ahead and do that. Once you're done with all of that, everything's filled in, you'll hit create new event, and that event will go up onto the calendar. If, once you've done that, you want to create another instance of it, like the second session, when you'll go essentially just to the event itself. And let me get this pulled up so I can know exactly what the context and the syntax is. And you'll hit duplicate event. That will create the event, a duplicate of it. You can change the header to say this is session 2 of 3 or whatever. The other thing is, when you do that duplication, you need to make sure you change the date. I often forget that. So make sure you do that. And the picture will not carry over. So you need to re-upload the picture or upload a different picture to fill that in. And that's the basics of that. It's a pretty simple system. It will be up then on the Gauntlet Hangout sign-up site and available for everyone to see at that point. Rich, do you want to fill in anything I missed on that, or what comes after?
Couple things. So the account that you'll be using should be linked to Gmail or Google profile. It's the easiest way to do it, because, and I say this because I've answered this question a few dozen times, the time zone on the listing is your time zone, as long as it's the time zone you set up on your Google profile. And so when other people come and view it, as long as they've logged in with an account that's linked to a Google profile, they'll be viewing it at their time zone on their Google profile. So what time is it? It should be your time. And if it's not your time, then you might want to just check your Google settings for whatever profile you're using for the account, because I will get asked that a lot, and it's just a thing.
When you sign up, you will often get an email from the Hangouts, and you can use that to add that to your calendar. Sometimes it doesn't. There's some oddities with the system on that. So my suggestion would be, when you sign up for something or you make an event for yourself, you go ahead and put that in your calendar by hand. It's functionality that we're looking at for the future. Joshua, you had a question?
Yeah, a couple of questions actually. Okay. One is, is that a requirement that you book some length of time in advance to allow Gauntleteers who have a $7 Patreon backing to sign up? And so oh, go on.
Okay, well, let me answer that one first, and then I'll get to your second question. Yeah, so we ask that people post games a minimum of 4 to 5 weeks out. And that's both for the Patreon users, but it's also because we do have a community of people that kind of commit ahead of time, that we ask them to sign up ahead, that they plan out that they're going to play. And that's made it so, in part, that we get a pretty regular attendance. I have 1 or 2 problems with that, you know, in my games, but much less than I've had in other communities when I've run. So that right now, for example, next week is going to be the first week of January, and then we'll open it up for people to start posting games for March at that point. So it can be that far out that we're doing. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely.
And your second question?
Yeah, so the second question was about what you said about coming and playing first, which is something that I'm keen to do, but and I guess probably many others too, find it quite difficult. Firstly, difficult time zone, difficult life commitments. I'm not a $7 sign up, so I can't get the pre-booking, so you know, and so on. Is this mandatory to do that? One of the reasons I'd like to run is because it means that I can set things in a way that will kind of work for me schedule-wise. So it's clearly much easier for me to do that than to play.
Well, one of the things I'll say is we are working on getting more users across time zones. And so we're getting more people running on non-standard time zone, Australian and European and so on. So I'm hoping that that will ease that up. We've also got quite a few more GMs in the mix now. So I'm hoping that that problem of availability will reduce itself. And I think that that's reasonable. I really do think you should play with us before you run. I don't want to say mandatory, but I think it's so important to what we do with the community. I feel kind of strongly about that. Now, Jason may have a different view on that, but that's what I'm going to say.
I'm with you, Lowell. I think it is imperative that you play with the Gauntlet community because, number one, you're going to be recruiting from that community. And if you haven't put in any capital, and again, Josh, I know you've been kind of around the periphery and helped out with Gauntlet and promoted things and all that kind of stuff. But just as a general question, you've got to put in the capital with the community for them to trust. Like, oh, I played with Joshua before. I played with Lowell before. I played with Thomas before. I'll give them a shot. Now, if scheduling is a problem, and I get it, right? You're on the outside looking in. You're not a $7 patron. How are you actually going to get in a game, especially if you have narrow windows? Notify me, notify Lowell or Jason. We'll build a game for you to participate in. We'll help you get there. That's no problem. I've done it. Mark Causey had not run online, and he wanted to dip his toe in and run during Gauntlet Con. We ran 2 sessions. I just built from the Gauntlet community. We'll do that. We're happy to help you that way.
Yeah, absolutely. We will work to your schedule to get that set. Does that to answer your question?
That's terrific. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? So one of the things is that I want to say, just as a general thing, this is maybe a future thing to think about, but when you post your game on the calendar, don't expect it to fill right away. You know, some games fill right away because people have run a lot and people know them, or they're running sexy games. So that happens, but other games may take a while to fill. And so I suggest that you give the game several weeks to see how it does. You can advertise it in the Gauntlet Community G+ channel. You can advertise it generally on G+. You can work and reach out to people to recruit for it. Feel free to do that, especially if you're running something that's unusual. And sometimes you're not going to get a full table. Sometimes you'll get a smaller table. You'll have 2 or 3 people. I ran Worldwide Wrestling at Gauntlet Con with 2 players, and it was, for a 6-player game, and it was still amazing. And I dug that. But I've also had games that haven't made. I've put games on the calendar that people have been like, I am not committing my time to play that game. That does not look like what I want to do. For example, I put on John Wick's Blood and Honor, the samurai game, last year, and yep, I had 1 bite. Reached out and recruited people, and in the end, I had to change it to something else about a week beforehand. Rich, would you agree on that?
Absolutely. I tried to do primetime adventures with the caveat of I want a core of players to play in every session, and people just couldn't do it. They're like, I can play these two, but not these two, and it just wouldn't work. I mean, that's a game that requires a level of commitment. There might be games that don't work in the Gauntlet format.
Yeah, there are a couple of requirements that we do have for Gauntlet games now that we've kind of talked through and worked out. One of them is that everybody will, when they GM, will provide some kind of minimal safety tool. The X card is our general default choice. I use it because it's easy to do, it's well known, and it works in the tight context. Some other people use more advanced safety tools, so they're available out there for people. I will have in the notes a link to Breakout Con, run by, of course, some amazing people, and they have a list of really excellent safety tools. And the other thing I would say is our expectation is that you have an open table, which means some people might sign up for one session. Some people might sign up for two. It might change around. And as a GM, you need to be prepared for that and be thinking about that. I just ran Star Trek Adventures for 3 sessions. It was one adventure, but I had people changing out in each session, and I had to be prepared for that. And we worked around it, and I think it was still good. So just keep that in mind. So that's what you can do. What's the policy for changing a game like that? If, let's say, that you go to run a game and you've waited multiple weeks and it hasn't filled, then I would reach out to Jason or I to tell us that you're going to be changing your game or canceling it. I mean, those are possibilities. I would ask that you reach out to the person, if anyone has signed up, that you check in with them and tell them that that's what you're thinking, so you keep them informed about that. Tell them before you make any changes. Feel free to change it to something else, recognizing that it may or may not fill. But I would say about a week out would be the time at which I would go, okay, I've got nobody here for this session, might not work for the time or whatever, or change it especially if you got somebody there. Another point that Tomer just made is on the Gauntlet events, when you make an event on our Hangout site, as a GM, you can, under the creator controls, you can change it so you can see who signed up. You can see their emails that they signed up with. So I think that's an important step there, because you're going to want to reach out to contact them before the game. And we'll come back to that idea about contacting players and so on in a little bit. But I think we covered our Hangout site. Well, if there are any questions about that, we'll kind of swing back around that. Let's talk about the more complicated and crazy part of this. The thing that we're actually doing now that is a big pain in the ass is setting up the Hangouts to be recorded on YouTube. Now, all of you may have already done this. And if so, you've gone through the baptism of fire that is the YouTube setup. Rich, I'm going to turn this part over to you. I'll fill in on this, okay, because I've been talking quite a bit, okay?
Okay, that sounds fun. I am going to screen share because while Lowell can create pictures with his words and word balloons, I am better at pointing at stuff and then letting that speak for me. So what you want to do, and I'm going to go ahead and present. Can I present? Can I do present? Oh, you'd have to tell me to present. Okay, I'll just keep talking. What you want to do in order to create a Hangout on air, right? If you create a Hangout normally through an event invite, it's not going to give functionality to yourself and to your players that are really great. So what you want to do to create that is you need to go to YouTube, and then you need to go to Creator Studio. Okay, so when you go to Creator Studio, And you come in here and you got a whole bunch of videos, all that exciting stuff. You want to go to live streaming. And again, this is in a little doc that we've created in Google Docs, so you can take a look at it step by step. But hey, we're live, so let's just show you. So you click on the live streaming, and then you want to create it in events, because this is for a future time. Now, stream now means that you have to have some stuff like OBS, Open Broadcaster software, or something else to do streaming. That's not what we're doing. That's for YouTube's pitiful attempt to try to be Twitch. Don't worry about it. It's useless. Okay, so you go to events, and then you want to create a new live event. You can also drop down to the bottom, and we'll take a look at that in just a minute. So you create a new live event. Okay, and then it's pretty basic, right? You just type in whatever you want to name it, call it our test live event. You set your time so that you can set this for a future event if you want. You can go ahead and set this up whenever you set up the Google event if you want. I usually go just a few days ahead of time. You set the time. You can type in the time as well if you want to be weird and do it at 9:15. You do that. You can add an end time, but it's a live event, so it's going to keep going until you click the button. Description is whatever description you want on the YouTube video. And again, this is a YouTube video. We'll talk about it in just a second, but this doesn't have to go out to the entire world. You don't ever have to even hit the record button. You can just set it up as a Hangout on Air video, and everyone will get the functionality within Hangouts without you ever having to go out. I find it incredibly valuable because I'm terrible at taking notes, and having the ability to go back to the YouTube video and watch people's reactions. It's a very fun thing to do. Or there are websites where you can just strip out the audio and listen to that like a podcast. I use it for game notes a lot. Tags are just, you want to hashtag out anything you want to put. I usually, for RPGs, I'll do that. And then I might go something along the lines of Gauntlet RPG as well. So people might look at that. So the type you want to do quick, because that uses the Google Hangout on Air. And then you can go private, which means the video will only be available to people that you select. Unlisted, which is my default. Or public. Now, public usually will post out to your Google Plus that it goes live, and people can jump in and watch the game as it's going on. You may not be that bold. That's A-okay. You can go with unlisted, and then once you create the event, if you said to start it now, it's going to pop up into the new Hangout window, and you go. If you do it at a future date, and I'll just go ahead and do that at a future date so we can take a look at it. So today at 5:30, I'm going to do test live event. I've got it set as unlisted in a type of quick, and then I create the event. Now it's going to pop me back to that events window, and I can go down here, and there's test live event. Now this is a background for my YouTube channel. You can make that however you want in the Creator Studio. I can go in early and start the Hangout on Air. I could start it right now. But then it's like putting a portable hole in a bag of holding. Everything blows up, so don't. Please don't do that. You can go in and you can edit the time as well. So then you can go back in and it drops you right back to the window. So that is how you would create a Google Hangout on Air. And I'll stop screen sharing, I think. Where does it go? I'm lost. There we go. Oh, you're muted still. Lol. So, by the way, another thing about Hangout on Air, sometimes people will be talking on mute. Just tell them they're talking on mute, because feeling weird about telling them that information is only going to drag out the amount of time before you're gaming again.
It is true. And muting discipline is an important thing. I tell people, if you're not talking, if you're out, mute yourself. But also be aware of when you're muted or unmuted. It requires some attention. Sherry, my wife, is notorious for talking at length before she realizes she muted herself, and it happens every session. When you get the Hangout on Air up as a GM, there are going to be some buttons at the top. One of those has a little head person thing with a plus by it. when you want to add people to your event, you'll click on that, and it'll pull up a link that you can email them, or you can drop those email addresses from the Gauntlet Hangout site just straight into the send invite as blah, and then there's an invite button, and that'll send that out to people. So that's the most basic thing there. Get people in. Once everybody's set, there's a button at the bottom. If you want to record or broadcast, there's a start broadcast button. You'll click that, and it will take a second, but it will start recording for you. So that's the real basics on that. If you don't want to record, just don't hit the button. Generally, I don't send links out for the event ahead of time because we did that in the past. It used to be that Google allowed you to kind of do Hangout event things, and then you would click and people wouldn't know where to click and they would get lost and stuff. What I do is I will contact the users about a week ahead of time to remind them that we have the game. I'll point them to any materials and then say, hey, I will send you an email with the invite link at the time of the event. I usually send out those links about 5 minutes beforehand because here's the thing. You've probably all played face-to-face, so you know about the half hour of bullshittery that you have when you're sitting around talking with each other, before the game starts. In Hangouts, we have that, but it's called technical difficulties. And so that is what will happen there. You will have people coming in, people's mics don't work, people don't see the invite, all of that kind of thing. So expect and budget yourself about 10 to 15 minutes at the start of a session for that to happen. There are a couple of very common problems when you're running online. Let's talk about those. And you may all be aware of these, but I want to go through them really quick. One, you may be hearing an echo. An echo will happen if someone's speakers are getting picked up by their microphone. Oftentimes, it's happening because someone has not great headset and they've got their volume turned up too high. So the easy fix to that is to turn it down. Another thing with that is that if you want to check and see where you're getting the echo, you can mute. As a GM, you can mute people to kind of test that out to see. Anybody can mute anybody else if you're hearing noise on those things. The other thing that happens is if you're running on a Windows PC, you have a exciting delight that comes with having Windows updating. It'll tell you, no, that's not your microphone in Google. So there are settings at the top on the Google Hangouts that will show you your mic and your headset. Try changing those first. If changing those around doesn't work, then you may need to drop out of the call. You can come back in using the link and reset your microphone settings actually in the control panel of Windows. I'm not going to go through that process because that's its own thing, but know that that's a possibility. That happens from time to time. Another common problem is roboting. Players will start to crack up. Their voice will sound weird. You will know it when you hear it. The easiest solution to this, and the one that almost always works, is to have that player drop and come back in. Rich, I'm going to let you answer those questions we just got there.
Josh asked, what's the Gauntlet etiquette around technical difficulties? One person has problems, do you carry on playing or what? So, if it's any of the common technical issues that we've talked about, we'll work through them, give them an opportunity, maybe take like a 2 to 3 minute break. If somebody has to reboot their computer or switch over to a phone, I do everything I can to give them a good 3 to 5 minutes. Now, I run 2 or 3 hour sessions, so I kind of do the mental math. How much time needs to be dedicated to help this person with that problem versus how much time is left in the game, how much is it going to cause us to stutter out. I also check in with the other play group. Hey guys, do you mind if we wait just a couple minutes and we may take a break? at that point, an early break, or we may just chat about something, or I may just shift scene away from that player character. I do my best to try to keep people along, especially if it's a new player and this is their first chance and they're kind of struggling with Hangout gaming. I'll do my best to keep working along. But if it comes to a point where maybe it's the third time where they just disappear, or there's so much lag that you can't really, lag is the killer. Like, that's the one that I can't really work past, because I can't hear you, you can't hear me. And that's the one where I'm very likely to say, hey, I don't think it's working out. Your bandwidth is a real problem. And did you talk about I don't think we talked about it, but at the top of a Hangout window, you've got the gear icon, and then you've got a little thing that looks like a cell phone signal. You can adjust your bandwidth. Another thing you can do is you can actually just turn your camera off. Both of those things will help if you're having significant lag issues. If you try those things and it's still not working, that is the point where I'll probably say, hey, I don't think it's going to work out. I'm going to have to ask you to drop out. And I know I was in a game where Jason had asked someone. It's rare, but I'll do it for the sanctity of keeping the game moving forward for the majority of the players. Is that fair? Does that make sense? Good.
Let me talk about some other structural things with running. These are just what I'm going to call best practices for running. I would suggest that you keep an eye on the time. Know your time. When you're running online, you should always know how much time you have left in the session. Generally, if I'm running a 2.5-hour game or a 3-hour game, I will take a break at the midpoint. And I tell the players this at the start. Give them that expectation so they don't get antsy. Give them that break to get up, to get more beverages, to walk around, whatever they need to do. I usually take about 5 minutes. Ask everybody, okay, you can mute your microphones, mute your camera during that time period there. Related to that, hydrate. Rich stresses this all the time. Make sure that you've got a beverage with you, because your voice will sometimes give out. Because you're running online, you may be talking more than you might otherwise at a face-to-face game. You want to have that, and so at that point, the break becomes a pee break at that point. But
it's
really
okay. It's not a bad thing, right? If you end up taking a break every hour, it's not the worst thing in the world. In fact, I've used the extra bit of hydration to force me to have to take breaks in some games. So I've got to take a break, guys, because I'm wiggling around in my chair.
And the great trick is, if you've got really good time discipline and you're watching the scenes, is you can take the break on a cliffhanger, and players will when you do that. So it's another great sort of dramatic highlighting technique. I also use it when I get stuck. So I will go, okay, well, let's take our break now. I've seen Jason do that, especially in Monster Hearts, where it's very clearly he needs a moment to catch his breath mentally. And so he's using the break for that. So generally, I run 2.5 hours on the weeknights and 3 hours on the weekends. Some people are running 4-hour games. It's fine if you want to put a 4-hour game up on there. Recognize that people may be a little adverse to that. I'm an old dude. I can only run and play for about 3 hours online. That's a point at which my brain goes, I can't take this anymore. Just because of the sitting in front of the camera, the looking at the TV, the headphones, there's something about that I hit that 3-hour mark, and that's it for me. You may not have that experience, but I think 3 and 4 hours, 3 hours is the standard block. 2.5 hours is another standard block. If you're going to do 4 hours, I would make sure that you mention that in the description so people are aware of that you're doing kind of a non-standard time.
You don't get to get up and walk around, right? Because then you're out of camera. There are a lot of things to consider that are natural when you're at a live table that are unnatural when you're on Hangout.
Mm-hmm. This is a thing that I picked up from Games on Demand, from their convention suggestions. They talked about running one-shots and so on. if you get to towards the end of a session, you're in the last half hour, think about how you can compress. Think about how you can bring things to resolve in that time. I tell players that ahead of time. I say, hey, if we get to the last 20, 15 minutes, I may hard frame things. I may condense things just so we can kind of get to a wrap up. Give players that expectation, and then you can do that towards the end of the session. Would you agree on that, Rich?
Yes.
So that's a thing that I think is important. Some people, Rich does this for every session. I do this for every other session. Some other people do it a different schedule. We do a thing called Roses and Thorns, which is a go around to get positive and negative feedback. I always start with the negative feedback, and I say, okay, we're going to do Roses and Thorns. Here's something I don't think I did well at the game, or something I wish we had happened, or we lost this player during the play, or this system thing seems weird. And make sure you go around in order and have everybody say something, and push them, even if they say, oh, I don't have anything negative. Ask them to say something. Don't push too hard, and then you do the same thing with positives. It's a chance to call out good play. It's a chance to call out scenes that you liked, that kind of thing. It scared the hell out of me to do that. I'm going to tell you quite honestly, I did not do that for the longest time until I watched Rich do it every session, learn from that every single session. Some people don't do it. Some people are very skilled, and they'll talk with people outside of the thing, or they'll do a Discord debrief. We do have a Discord for the Gauntlet, and some people will go after the game and go over there to talk. That creates a nice split, especially if you've got an emotionally pressured game. That's a good outlet for that. But yeah, keep an eye on the time. Know when you're in that last half hour. I think that's super, super important there. Rich, there's a good question that Stephen has here. Would you talk about how you structure your games?
Sure. So I have two general blocks that I work within. For the Gauntlet every other Tuesday night, which is Gauntlet City Limits, it's usually 2.5 hours. And for Saturday morning, which is Star Wars Saturdays in 2018, it is a 3-hour block. It's 9 to noon, although I may run a couple of afternoon slots for some of our West Coast folks. Like Tom's. I try to have action happening by the 20-minute mark within a 3-hour game, within the 15-minute mark within a 2-hour game. Now, for the Gauntlet City Limits, it's usually 2 sessions. It's in every other week, and I change games. So the first session, the second session will be structured very differently. The second session, we don't have to create characters. We don't have to create the world. We just continue forward the story. But I midpoint break, 20 minutes, shit needs to be happening. You need to be playing. Now, I love world building, and in longer campaign games like Lowell and I, we play mini-series worth of games, and we will spend a whole session in just character creation. But because you have drop-in, drop-out play, it's really not the best way. It's not a best practice for us, because say it's a 4-session thing and one person only gets in the first and second session. You spend 2.5 hours in character creation. Guess what? They get 1 game. That's not really... At some point, you stop making the world and you just play the damn game. And so 20 minutes is my cut. I try very hard to stuff to happen within 30 minutes. Within 20, 30 minutes, stuff happens. Go ahead.
And I'm going to agree with Rich on that for the 2 sessions. If you're doing a 2-shot, I will say, as a counterpoint, I run monthly games, like a month of Sundays, like Mutant Year Zero and things like that, where I do take about half of that first session to do world building. It's a 3-hour session, so I'll do that up to the break point. If that's really crucial to what I want to do, if it's really important. And I love doing that. And I'll tell players on the description that the first session, half of that will be world building. But I do make sure that after that point, at that midpoint, when we get into that second half, we're doing something. We go to the adventure at that point. I do think you have to have play in a session. An entire session of world building online is difficult. Character gen and pre-gens. This is a really good question. I usually will give a framework. If we've got playbooks or archetypes that I think we can get through in 10 or 15 minutes, I'll let players have those choices. If it's a system with more complicated development, like Star Trek Adventures or anything that has crunch to it, I do pre-gens. I tend to strip off things like names and things like that. If they have those in the pre-gens, boom, just do pre-gens. If you're using Roll20 in there, you can type them up ahead of time, or we usually use Google spreadsheets to do that. Sometimes what I do, like I've done with Kuro and some other games, is I'll do pre-gen, like 8 or 9 pre-gens. I'll do a full array of things and then let players choose. And then we'll just put those on one page.
I like, sorry,
yeah.
Something I heard during a talk about Dresden, the Fate, not the Dresden Fate Accelerated, is half gens. I like doing half gens, where you do all of the kind of mechanical work, but you leave open the possibility of relationships and backstory and the like. So people kind of step in. You can kind of overlay this onto any system. Just do a little HX round, right? So-and-so and so-and-so, you guys did a thing. How do you know blah, blah? And then they feel like they live in those characters a bit more and have the opportunity to create a personality that they can present and play. But you've done all of the heavy lifting that will save a significant amount of time for games that you're talking about.
Yeah, even if I do pre-gens, I've got the backstory cards. I'm going to go to those to get questions, or I may already have some in my head that we're gonna do that. So I think that's what Jesse asks, how do we share that world building info for players who can't make the first session? If a player is going to come in for the second or third session, and I can see that on the signups, I will point them to whatever document we've written things into, get them that so that they can go and check that out. Or I will also say, if you want to, you're not required to, but if you want to, you can go and watch the video for session 1. The important thing, I think, is that, and this is kind of difficult sometimes, is for online GMs, if a player is coming in cold, you want to bring the sort of the verisimilitude of your world building, but don't require it. Those players who are coming in, they should get the feeling of it, but they should not be at a disadvantage because they didn't know it. And that is a hard balance to strike sometimes, especially if you're doing world building in session 1. It's just something to be prepared for. And I've had to do that. Like I did that Reign of Crows sort of Fate Game of Thrones game. And we did a lot of world building in session 1. And then one of those players couldn't make it for session 2. And they came in we had another person who came in session 2 and on. And I tried to make sure that we could get them the info that they needed ahead of time.
I offer as an option, there's a question here that kind of dovetails in about character creation ahead of time or a person who can't make the first session. I try very hard to adhere to the idea of this being an open table. I want people to sign up for this and it not be work. So I will offer up the character keeper a week in advance, or I know Lowell, you'll offer up pre-gens a week in advance and say, hey, if you want to jump in and kind of mention the idea of this character. Here's another thing that I do that isn't required, but I'm sorry, I'm a creature of habit. I will create a Google Plus event, which you can't easily get to now because Google hates itself. So you can go to plus.google.com/events and you can create an event there. And then I'll invite everyone from the RSVP system into the Google Plus event. And that's where I will share the character keeper, any rules documents, any setting documents that I may want to share with them in advance. And I'll do that about a week in advance and say, hey, if you have a particular playbook or class concept that you want to throw out there, feel free to, and people can do that within the chat within that event. It's kind of a nice container. That's also where I'll link the Hangout once the link is live. And so I don't require, and I will say, you know, even if 4 out of 5 people have made their characters going in, we are still going to create characters. And I'll say, if it's a PBTA game, you know, please don't go through HX here. Let's do that live, because I think it's a really great organic conversation to have that doesn't always work online. And this is coming from a person who runs play-by-post, which is all happening via text.
Jesse, I'm going to come and answer your question just a sec, but I want to dovetail onto something that Rich said. Let me talk about how I do the setup for the games. And I really highly recommend this. A week before your game, you send an email to everyone who's playing, and you say, hey, this is our game. Don't forget, it's this time. Here's what we're doing. Here's what the tone is. I have a Google Drive folder with the materials. If you want to go ahead and look at it, if they're pre-gens, if you want to call dibs on something, you can go ahead and do that. I've got a cheat sheet there. And I send that out. A week ahead of time is about the perfect moment, because if you send it out too early, they can forget. And about a week out, somebody will go, oh shit, I can't make that. And they can change their waitlist status. And then you have some time to get another player in. You want to poke people about a week beforehand to make sure that they are in there. It's super important. Other thing is, while I'll put all that stuff up there, I don't come in as a GM with any expectations that they've actually read it, because they won't. Some people will, and some people are really good about that. And when you do a game and it hums like that, then great. But I think you always need to come in with the expectation that players will not have. You can check in whether people have done that is important. And that's a good way. To about a week ahead of time, send them that, point them to the information. Jesse asked about something that is interesting. Can you ever expand the number of players from session to session? I have only done that once. And what it was is I had a player that was just in the first session and then was waitlisted for the other ones and had a really good time, was a good player, and the game had enough space to do it. And so I reached out to the other players and I checked in with them first. Before I said, hey, yeah, come for second and third session, I checked with everybody else. And I was careful about that. I didn't want to do that because, Lord, it is hard enough running for 4 people online. When you get 5 or 6, it can really split the attention. So, except for Worldwide Wrestling, then it's awesome. But just keep that in mind. You can do it, but really look at the circumstances. We also, Stephen asked about the cats, about the tone conversation. I try to make sure that if there's a particular tone or you know, it might be dark or unpleasant, I try to mention that in the game's description so that players who are coming in, I'm assuming that they've read the game's description, that they know that might be coming. And then we will stop off at the beginning and talk about tone. There's a thing called CATS, which I know a lot of us here know about, but I'll put a link to a great little document that somebody put together that has a really cool graphic for the CATS, talks about how you do it. And I'll put that in this link there. I think it is important to do that and to check in and to talk about what people are comfortable with or not comfortable with. What are the limits of things in that? Rich, do you want to talk a little bit about how you handle tone?
Sure. I think that it's important in your RSVP, like from the outset, talk about the tone, because people are signing up for this and they're making decisions, right? I can do this other thing, or I can play in this game. And so be clear about it. If you're playing a comedic game, a light game, don't pitch it as all dark and mysterious. Don't bait and switch, folks, because they will have waited for this for quite a while, put it into their calendar, anticipated it, and then you know, that's just not cool. So even if you have this great idea of, oh, I'm going to tell him this is going to be this dark, depressing thing, but then something funny happens, let us know. We're story gamers. You know, we don't have to have a theatrical performance. Like, we can buy into it if we know going in that this is going to be a dark and then occasionally whimsical thing. Put that in the pitch. I will talk about it in the outset by talking specifically about the game that we're playing, because I think the game can be a great vehicle to the type of tone. Mechanics that are well constructed will carry forward how the game should be played from a tone perspective. I think Cats is great. And I also feel like during your initial character discussion, world building discussion, the tone is part of that conversation as well. You can guide that just from the questions that you ask and the type of world that you're setting up.
And I think it's important to explicitly have that tone conversation, because then if you have somebody in the game that is off tone, you can point back to that. I've had very few people who have kind of gone off tone, but I've stopped and said, hey, I don't, within the fiction that we've created, I don't think that necessarily works. But you have that right as a GM to do that. You've got a very limited amount of time to work in, so you're gonna need to do that. Great advice for building expectations. Do you have any advice on what makes his grabby pitch likely to get signups? If it's a sexy game, make sure that you highlight that we're playing Dungeon World or we're playing Monster Hearts. Just from what I know from technical writing, you have the first 3 to 5 lines to grab their attention. Look at that first line. Go for active voice. Take out any of the verb to be. Make it sound awesome. That would be my thing. I don't know what else to say about that.
I'm not great at pitches. I will grab from the back of the book or go to the drive-through for the actual game. And then literally my 1%er swoop, which by the way has a wait list almost as long as the openings for a couple of the sessions. I just stripped out the stuff from the Robert Nolan's page for 1%er and then put in some Star Warsy words. Like, because he wrote a really good pitch. Like, they're pitching their game, so I just use their brain power.
And I'll have other people look at it. Tyler has sent me some stuff, and I've looked over his pitches, and I'll run it past Sherry and get that. It's worth it to have somebody look at it and to say, okay, what are you telling us about what we're doing, and how awesome does it sound? Let me talk about some other things when you're running online that are differences. I'm going to tell you right now, when you run online for people, if you may have already done this, you may have played, you may already have an expectation of this, but I want to reinforce this. People are distracted. Regardless of how awesome you are as a GM, you do not have the same level of attention that you are going to get at a face-to-face game. Be aware, be prepared, and be flexible about that. If information is important, be prepared to repeat it. Be prepared to repeat for emphasis. Be prepared to repeat your descriptions. It's just that you never quite know whether people have, distractions that are going on in the background, whether they've got family stuff, whether they can hear things downstairs, whether they have stuff at hand, cards that they're playing with. I think that's really, really important. I make sure that I have this door behind me. There are cats out there. Sometimes you'll hear the cats meowing because they desperately want in. I block that up. I tell my wife, this is the time we're going to be playing. I tell my niece lives with us. I tell her these are the times we're going to be doing this, so that they know and be prepared to get that out of the way. So I think that's important. Rich, you wanted to talk about the sort of the technical side of that.
I do. Thanks, Lowell, for queuing me up. As a GM, at a table, you have so many more and different tools at your disposal. In this game, for Hangouts, you have a window, right? Think about your window. Look behind yourself. Right? You don't have to. Okay, by the way, this costs like a couple bucks. Okay, it's like I'm not. Think about what's behind you. Take a look. Frame yourself within the window. Make sure that your microphone is nearby. I bought a pretty inexpensive, like $15 mic stand, but you can get swinger arms and other kinds of cool stuff. It's well worth the investment, right? Because this is the new place you play. Instead of buying that new hardback book of some trad game you may never play, why don't you get a blue mic for the exact same price or possibly a little cheaper? Lighting is important. Unfortunately, I had to deal with glasses. If you have lighting that is facing you, your eyes, the windows to your soul, are invisible because all they will see is the white of the light. The light is coming back into the camera. So try to backlight. Like, I actually am lucky enough in my new office that I have a skylight. This is natural light, so I'm pretty happy with it. No, it's natural light, like sun and stuff. But yeah, try to backlight yourself a little bit. Try not to have the light in the camera focus because it's going to blind people. And hey, J.J. Abrams is awesome, but lens flare is not. So those are some thoughts that I have. Notifying your young son that, hey, you're recording before you record, always a good idea. That is a thing that I know Lowell does. It's a thing I do. I actually have a little sign that I created for my door to say I am recording versus I'm just gaming, so that they know the difference when I'm in the office. But it's part of your performance, right? It's part of how you communicate. This is all that they see. What they hear and what they see, that's all you've got. Now, other people will use Roll20 and other mechanics and tools, but I really feel like in the kind of games that we play, being heard, communicating, reaching out to that camera is an important part of the performance as a GM. And I think you should be mindful of it. It creates a good first impression. And it also sustains people. When I look at the camera, when there's a particularly intense moment, that's big. Like, that has an impact on the game. It absolutely does.
Yeah, you do have some space here to move and to lean in and to talk and to use your voices here. So don't be afraid to do that and to be big with your gestures there. Another thing is that when you're running online, you may be pushing and hard framing more than you're used to. If you're used to running Dungeon World or games that are much more collaborative, realize that because people are isolated, they need a little more structure. You don't need to like trad it up completely and put them in a box, but you need to go, okay, let's move on to this, or okay, let's cut the scene here. Be prepared to do that. Don't feel bad about doing it. Check in. Make sure people are ready. Okay, Rich, that seems like a good place to cut. Is it okay? I'll move on. Check in. I always check in all the time. And I think that's really vital there. In terms of handling spotlight, I try at the beginning of the session. This is one of my tricks. Is I try to make sure right at the beginning I go around in a particular order. Like if I were running right now, I would make sure that I would start with Jesse, and I would have the camera icons ahead. And when I went around to deal with players, and I would kind of stick to a hard order, I follow that order from time to time. If I'm going to break that because of pairings, whatever, I say that. But generally, if you watch any of my games, you'll see me go through in a very set way, because online offers a whole bunch of challenges for attention. And you want to tell the players, yes, you are going to get your turn. You need to assure them of that. If they're not assured of that, they may get antsy and butt in, and interrupt and so on. I've seen that happen. Before I played in the Gauntlet, I had players that clearly had been attention starved in their other games, and they would just throw themselves into any scene. And so I had to teach them, yeah, I'm going to be good to you. I'm going to take care of you on this. The most important thing possible in this, always when you direct a question to the table, direct it to someone. Direct it to Jesse. or direct it to Stephen. Say, okay, Stephen, okay, here's a general question for the group. Let me ask you what you think about it. If you're going to ask them, okay, which direction you're going to go, don't do that to the table, because people will hesitate. They don't want to talk over each other. They don't have all of the looking at each other to, okay, who's going to take command on this? So even if it's a broad question that you're going to have, the group needs to answer for consensus, tune it to someone. Always do that. And where you can, try to get those questions more specific. That's huge. Rich taught me that. And once I got that in my toolkit, it fixed a lot of problems I was having at the table. It's a small thing, but it's so good.
It's math, right?
Yeah.
If you think you're going to have maybe a scene every 5 to 7 minutes, and you ask that open, like you lay it out, and there's that point where you ask that open question, and there's going to be invariably 30 seconds of pregnant pause. I have an idea. I'm going to say something. Someone else said an idea, and they said something too. Now you've both stopped. Now you wait because you want to be nice and they should talk. Then you tell them they should talk. Now you've broken the whole moment. You just lost a minute. So if you're doing six scenes, 6-minute scenes, right? That's 10 minutes you just shit away out of your hour. Don't do it.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to do it. Stephen asked about the 5 to 7 minutes for scenes. I would say that really varies, but I think when you're budgeting time for scenes, really keep an eye to, okay, I think we're at a good cut point here, and maybe tighter than you would do at the table. I always check in when I do the cut, but I do try to cut in to do that. I don't time the scenes, but I'm always paying attention for that. Okay, we can move on to this next bit, especially if I can just hand that to another player. Like I go, okay, that seems like a good play to cut, Rich. Sherry, now you wanted to do this scene. If I know that, I can make that cut naturally. And if I'm going fast around, if I'm really cutting like after a couple of minutes, I can get that going so that everybody's always engaged and doing that fast.
My cut time. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. No.
My cut timer is often 2 factors. In the current scene, how much spotlight time has this player or these players had this session? If they've had a lot, my personal timer is I'm going to move through this faster than I would for someone who I haven't heard a whole lot from. The other timer is who's the most bored-looking player right now? And I measure that. Like, how super bored are they? Have they walked away? Okay, there's a potential thing. Now, if they've got a personal deal like dog, cat, jumps on thing, that's fine. But you can really read the table, even though there are tiny little avatars at the bottom. And I use that as the kind of, I call it the worst common denominator. Like the least common denominator of interest is how I will gauge a scene versus not, because we're all playing together. And I'll often break scenes into pairs versus solos, but I try not to have a 4-person scene unless it's a big action sequence, or there's a planning phase, or people really want that. But I've found that, again, just like when you call on names, if you have 4 players in there until they develop that groove of, oh, I know that when he takes in a sharp breath, he's about to talk, there will be those stutter steps between people getting that cadence of online conversation.
Yeah, and I'm pretty meta about that. I'll say, okay, I don't think we've heard a lot from Jesse, or we haven't heard from this person for a while, so I'm going to cut to them next. One of the tricks I do is if somebody is talking, I've given them a question, and they maybe are thinking about their answer, I'll say, okay, blah, 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 Jesse, what about this? I'll see the pause. I'll go, okay, I'm going to come to Rich next. Rich, just be ready. I'm going to come to you next. Just so that they know the timing on that. I think that's important. For GM-less games, when I've run GM-less games like Kingdom and Microscope, I'm still running it. I established that I'm the facilitator. I'm going to handle all of the structural stuff for how the turns go, so on. I'm going to handle it. I'm not going to intrude on things, but if there's a structure to be kept to, that's my job at that point, is to facilitate that. And I think that's the most important. I don't think there's any issue. There's a question here about having less than 4 players. 3 players is awesome. I got to tell you, I run for 4 players because I think it's a good number. It allows a lot of people opportunity. But if someone drops, I also think that's awesome, because those 3 players are going to get, 25% of that attention is going to be shifted onto them. So now they've got a third of the thing. And 2 players even, if you have 2 players, that's sweet too, because then they know that they are awesome. 1 player, I'll probably cancel the game at that point.
Even on me, I do 4 or 5. I do 4 or 5 player on Saturday specifically because I am targeting games that have a wider reach, and that's because I don't feel like we have enough GMs for the amount of desire that there is for people to play with the Gauntlet. So I'm looking for games that have a wider, and that's just my personal choice. That's why we're happy that you guys are on here with us, because at some point I want to run those 2 and 3 more intimate games because I think they're awesome. But for Saturdays, I try to run a bigger game, and that's specifically because that's the choice. But 2 and 3 player games are great, and that's really fun.
Yeah, don't feel bad about setting it up just for that if you want to. We're getting now towards like the last 5-10 minutes here. So are there any more questions that you guys have? I've just brought that as a general question to the group, so I've just violated my prime directive. Jesse, do you have anything? Oh wait, I see Tom raise his hand up. I'm gonna jump to him. Come back to you if you have a question, Tomer.
We talked about it just before we started. How you go about possibly sharing another screen. So I know, for example, you, Rich, earlier in this exact cast, right? You shared your screen, for example, as a tool in the toolbox. But let's say you do plan to record a small group, and it's a GM-less game like the Quiet Year we were talking about, and having like a map as an extra thing up there. Is there a way to do that? Especially for the recording, like how, what do you need to be cognizant of as far as focusing on it so it gets recorded as the play screen in the background, or if you want to do that, etc.
So you have 2 choices, I think. You can either set the screen share and just leave the screen share up there, which can be a kind of a pain. But we use like a Google image. We'll do that for drawing tools so everybody can work on it, and then we've got that up there. That's one of the choices. The other choice is not a great one, but it's one that I've used. Is I use a secondary recording program to record just a screen that has the map in it. I use a thing called XSplit. When I'm running Mutants and Masterminds for when I was running that for my Wednesday group, I would just record the Roll20 screen. It's not a great solution, and it doesn't integrate. However, I do know that Twitch looks like it has like multiple screens going on. There's got to be a way to do that, but I haven't tried Twitch. So that's my crappy answer to that.
My answer isn't super duper either. I will do a screen share at pivotal moments, but I do it just from one, mostly for ease of use. If I have too many bibs and bobs and bits, my brain just gets scattered. So I'll play to that. And maybe with a game that's very map contingent, I might have the map as screen shared for a significant portion and then drop out of the map to portray characters within scenes.
Yeah, it's a rough solution. So I saw that Joshua, you had your hand up a second ago, so let me come to you.
Yeah. So if I had a game that I wanted to run for a specific person, and I want to, but I want to run it on Gauntlet so that I can do it that way. Is that something you can do, or does it have to be completely open invite and you can't get a particular person in?
I don't know exactly how we've handled the policy on that. I have when I was first starting, before Sherry got a setup on the Patreon level, I would run a game for 3 people and then have her play as the fourth. I think if you're doing that on a rare occasion, I think that's fine. I wouldn't do that as a regular thing. And Jesse says, I think there is something about that in the Hangouts guide. There's some discussion of that. I'm going to put a link to that in the notes for the video. So Jason has written up a really strong guide for all of this, and I think he talks about how the policy is. That is just a dynamite question, though. I wish I had an answer right off the top of my head for you. Jesse, did you have a question?
No, I think I'm pretty good. Thank you so much for everything you've answered so far. Stephen, what about you?
Yeah, I've got one. First, sorry for coming in late. I had all kinds of issues today, but I was wondering about how to use sound in the games. Like, I don't normally play background music or anything, but like I'm about to GM Star Trek Adventures, for example, and I was like, oh, it'd be kind of cool if I could play like, 10 seconds of the Star Trek theme at the beginning, right as we're getting going, to kind of set the theme, or something like that. Does anyone do that?
I have thought about it, but it requires an external source to play that, because you can't really do that in YouTube when you're recording this. There is a program out there I know that some people use to put effects in during the game, but I haven't done that because for me it was just one more thing that I don't think the payoff was as good. But for Star Trek, where you've got distinct sounds, if you have like a little tape recorder, like a digital recorder or something where you could do that easily without having to muck around with it, that's the thing, is you want it to so you can activate it without too much mental attention. Because you've already got 6 or 7 other things you're worrying about. But other than that, I would steer away from too much music and stuff.
So last year when I ran Star Wars World, I actually used there's a couple of websites where you can create a crawl, and I created a crawl and I screen shared the crawl. And then I had everybody else muted, and I just played the Star Wars music over my own speakers because they were near the microphone. It was super worth it. And if you want to put forth that effort for the beginning of the game, go for it. Yeah. The advice, though, that is copywritten material that will be caught by Google's bots, and it is entirely possible your YouTube, due to the DMCA, your YouTube video might be taken off of public if you ever make it public. So that's something to be aware of. One thing that Tyler did when he ran Spirit of 77 that was awesome is that he had queued up a couple of playlists of YouTube videos from awesome 70s music, and then when he called break, he would say, and here's the music that's playing during our intermission, and he will link that up.
Great.
And the double, like the secret cool part was that when the song's over, or the couple song playlist was over, your break should be over. Wow, what a great idea. So you can use music. Be advised that it could cause a DMCA takedown of your video, which means they move it to private and you can't share it wide. And it is no longer extremely easy to edit your videos in YouTube because Gauntlet hates their own stuff.
Joshua just asked about the overlays. The overlays are a little more tricky. But we have a document on how to do them that Christo Mead has put together. I'll put a link to that in the discussion on the thing, and I'll drop it in right now for you guys. He's put it together.
And that's a thing. That's a thing that you can't do on regular Hangouts. That on Hangouts on Air you can do. That's one of the pieces of functionality that you lose that I really like.
Be aware, though, is that Google is a fickle mistress. And for example, I can't do overlays. For some reason, when I put overlays up, they'll stay there for maybe a minute and then they vanish. I don't know why. I have no idea. And it's always done that. There was a brief, sweet period of time when I could do it, and then it stopped. But I've got that doc in there. Rich has done some very cool stuff in other games to get that. So that's a technique worth looking at. All right, we are at the 11:30 hour, so I am going to stop the broadcast here. I want to thank you guys for taking your Saturday morning, afternoon, evening out to come in and listen to this. I will, once I get the video set, I'm going to drop a bunch of the links into the description, so they'll be there for you to check out. So that'll be available, and the video, of course, will be online and available via my my YouTube channel, but we'll have it on the Gauntlet thing as well. So there we go. Anything else? Anybody? Rich, when you have a last word there? See, Rich would make us do roses and thorns if this were a game now. So, but we're not going to do that. So. Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much. Oh, I'll tag this off. If you have questions, send them on to me. If there's things we didn't hit, send them on to me. We'll get those answered. We'll get those in some posts for you. Okay.
Thanks so much.